A new mission for the USS Constitution, Chapter 3.
David asked Admiral Stone, if we are going to host the negotiations, where will we pick up Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne? She replied,
They should already be aboard. They should have teleported aboard while you and I were talking in my cabin.
David barked, "Computer, locate Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne." The computer responded,
Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne are not aboard this ship.
David looked at Admiral Stone. "Where are they?" Obviously flustered, she replied.
I don't know.
David commanded computer, "Scan the ship for any unknown life signs." The computer replied,
Scanning. Scanning. There are no unknown life signs aboard this ship.
David said, Lieutenant Stevens, all stop. She replied,
All stop, aye, Captain.
David glared at the Admiral. "Well, Admiral, what the hell is going on?" The computer said,
Burst message has arrived for Admiral Stone and Captain Stevens.
David braked, in my ready room. He waved the Admiral in. As the door closed, David commanded, on screen. On the screen was a short command, mission scrubbed. Return to headquarters. York. David called out, Tall, see if you can get Admiral York on the comm, please. After a moment, Tall said, Captain, Admiral York. Admiral Stone looked at the image of Admiral York.
Admiral,
She began.
did you burst message Captain Stevens and me just now?
The Admiral replied,
No. What was the message?
David replied, mission scrubbed. Return to headquarters. York. Admiral Stone added.
Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne are not aboard this ship.
Admiral York replied,
Return to Earth orbit. I get security to begin an investigation. Captain, begin an investigation on your ship.
David replied, aye aye sir. David stuck his head out and ordered, Hank, back to Earth. Stella, UL-12, please. Number 1, get Security Chief Peel up here, double time. Larry replied.
Aye, aye, Captain.
A couple of minutes later, Larry stuck his head in the ready room.
Captain, Tasha is here.
David replied, send her in. Lieutenant Commander Tasha Peel entered the ready room, and David said, Tasha, Admiral Stone. Admiral York has ordered us to investigate a couple of things here on our ship. A bogus burst transmission addressed to Admiral Stone and me, and the absence of Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne, and anything out of place. We should do top-to-bottom search for the Admiral and Ambassador. I'll augment your guys with others as you think necessary. Tasha asked.
Do you want our crew to search physically?
David replied, yes. I want their noses in every common area until every inch of this ship has been searched. Tasha, use the computer to track every crewman during the search. I trust you to get this done. Larry, order every section chief to search every inch of their area of responsibility. Okay, get on it now. It took 2.5 days and every crewman to complete the search of the ship. Many things were found, except Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne. The items that were found were everyday items lost by crew members over the ship's life. Several items were as much as 90 years old, and others were lost only last week. David reported the results of their investigation to Admiral York. Admiral York told David that neither Admiral Keeler nor Ambassador Styne had been found, but the search would continue. Admiral Stone teleported down to Earth, and she worked with security to attempt to find the missing men. 10 days in orbit, David was sitting in his ready room fuming over the delays, the missing men, and the lack of communications from Naval Headquarters. He was hungry when the first officer stuck his head in.
Sir, Commander Sims wishes to speak to you.
David replied, send him in. Lieutenant Commander Sims stepped in, and David motions to him to sit. Commander, what can I do for you? Dale Sims spoke.
Captain, I had been tracking Admiral Stone up until this morning. But sir, she's gone.
David asked, Dale, why were you tracking her? He looked at the floor and replied.
Sir, I'm in love with her.
David asked, does she know? He looked up.
No, sir.
David shook his head. Tell me about the disappearance. Dale nodded.
I was tracking her this morning, and in one moment, she was gone. I used the ship sensors, and she is nowhere around the headquarters building. Grounds, store around the installation, not even anywhere in San Francisco. I tried her comm badge and tapped into the city's observation network. I checked the hospitals, everything I could think of.
Dale hung his head.
I'm sorry, sir.
David looked at him. What time did she drop out of sight? Dale replied.
1300 exactly, sir.
David put his hand on Dale's shoulder. I'll report this to Admiral York and Admiral Halloran. Dale, it's okay. She is a beautiful woman. If I were a single man, I could be interested, too. Dale's head snapped up.
Thank you, sir.
David nodded. I want your tracking logs. They might give naval security something to go on. Dale replied.
Aye, sir. Computer, give the captain the tracking logs for Admiral Stone.
The computer said.
Tracking logs are now available to the captain.
David ordered, Computer, transmit logs to naval security. The computer executed the command properly and reported.
Naval security has received the data.
David and Dale started looking over the data and found the precise time and place of Admiral Stone's disappearance. Dale commanded.
Computer, check and correlate all data available at the time marked 1300 hours at the last known location of Admiral Stone. Check GPS, satellite imaging, radiation readings, and ground imaging sources of every kind. The computer responded.
Working.
David and Dale waited, then the computer said.
Correlation completed.
David commanded, display. On screen was the correlated data. And one thing stood out, a burst of tachyon particles and a trace of those particles going into hyperspace. Both men exclaimed, let's follow that trace. David called out, O'Reilly, can we trace a path through hyperspace? The answer came quickly.
Aye, sir.
David asked, what do we need to do to follow the trace? O'Reilly replied.
I'll be right up, sir.
David called out, Number 1, take the ship to these coordinates as fast as possible. Larry replied.
Aye, aye, sir.
Captain O'Reilly stepped onto the bridge, and David asked him to teach the crew to trace the particles through hyperspace. O'Reilly asked.
How long ago was the trace made?
Dale replied.
About 12 minutes ago.
O'Reilly said.
Then we have to trace the particles as fast as possible.
He ordered.
Helm, UL-16. Captain, I don't know if even UL-16 will be fast enough, but we'll try.
Once David understood just what O'Reilly wanted to teach the crew, he relieved O'Reilly to return to mind the engines. O'Reilly called the bridge.
Captain, I can squeeze a bit more speed out of the old girl, say UL-17.
David told O'Reilly, okay, push it. After about 12 hours, the science station reported.
Captain, there is a huge object stationary in hyperspace just 1,000 kilometers from here.
David replied, all stop. O'Reilly, we have a huge object in hyperspace. How do we get into it? O'Reilly replied.
I can adjust the teleporter, but it's a little iffy, sir. We would need a volunteer who knows the risk.
Dale said.
I volunteer, Captain.
David shuddered. Okay, Dale. O'Reilly, Commander Sims and I will meet you in the teleporter room as soon as possible. From the communicator.
Aye, aye, sir.
David to Dale, let's go. Captain O'Reilly was crawling out from under the teleporter control console in the teleporter room.
Well, sir, we can only try it. Commander, here is a communicator that should allow us to talk to you while you are in hyperspace.
Dale smiled, mounted the teleporter dish, and waved to O'Reilly and David. A whirl of dust motes and Dale was gone. Then from the communicator.
Captain, I'm aboard one huge ship. I'll use my unicorder to find the Admiral.
David ordered, O'Reilly, send me. And David joined Dale, laser, unicorder, and personal shield. Where to Dale? Dale replied.
This way, sir.
As they began to track the Admiral, their unicorders did not indicate any life forms in the corridors. When they reached a certain point, the trace of Admiral Stone indicated that she and 2 other life forms were behind a blank bulkhead. Dale said that they were in a small room just on the other side of this bulkhead and that the bulkhead was 3 inches of solid metal of an unknown kind. David thought that they could possibly cut through the bulkhead using their lasers. David began to fire his laser at the bulkhead, cutting into it at a very slow pace. Dale added his laser, and they began to make some progress. But as the temperature began to rise in the corridor, they had to stop. After a few minutes, David said that he would cut a hole through to bulkhead to speak to those behind the wall. David carefully worked at one point until he had created the one single hole, and then he spoke, Admiral Stone, Can you hear me? He heard a voice.
Yes. I hear you.
David said, "This is Captain Stevens, Commander Sims, and I will try to free you." She replied.
Captain, it's very hot in here, probably from your laser.
Dale said.
We'll get some more equipment here to free you without cooking you. Hold on!
David called, "O'Reilly, we need a cutting tool that won't heat the room." O'Reilly's voice answered.
I'll have to rig something up. I'll get back to you in about an hour.
During the hour they waited on O'Reilly, David and Dale spoke to the prisoners. They learned that Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne were in the room and had not eaten for 12 days. The cell they were in had no amenities, except a little water. They could only deposit their waste in one corner of the cell. Finally, O'Reilly arrived with a machine, and he began to cut through the bulkhead a single round hole about 3 feet in diameter. But the machine was water-cooled and used recycled water, even though the corridor became very wet. Soon, the machine cut through the bulkhead. Dale stuck his head in and saw the 3 prisoners lying on the floor. He crawled into the cell and helped Admiral Stone to the hole as David and O'Reilly helped her out. Dale helped the 2 men, and soon the 3 prisoners were in the corridor. Admiral Stone could walk, but Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne needed to be carried. It took about half an hour to reach the teleporter site and be teleported onto the Constitution. David called sickbay and asked for a medical team to care for the prisoners. Then turning to O'Reilly, he asked, "Can we get enough explosives onto that ship to blow it to Kingdom Come?" O'Reilly looked at David.
Sir, just think of the technology we could get from the thing.
David replied, "It was used to kidnap our people. We must destroy it to send a message to those who did this deed that we mean business." O'Reilly replied,
You're right, sir. I'll send a remote-controlled quantum torpedo and blow it up. Consider it done, sir.
David put his arm around O'Reilly's shoulders. "Thanks, old friend." 10 minutes later, the science officer reported.
Captain, a huge explosion and that ship in hyperspace is gone.
David told the communications officer to inform Admiral York and Admiral Halloran of the events concerning the missing people and the ship in hyperspace. Then David ordered, "Hank, back to Sector 00, Helm UL-12, please." Stella and Hank replied in unison.
Aye, sir.
David looked at Larry. "Number 1, I'm going to sickbay to see just how our passengers are doing. You have the con. Dale, you're with me." Then David and Dale entered the personnel lift. David and Dale entered sickbay and inquired about their guests. Admiral Stone looked up.
Captain, how did you find us?
David smiled. "Commander Sims was tracking you when you disappeared. We correlated all the data and followed your tachyon particle stream." She looked at Dale.
Why were you tracking me, Commander?
Dale looked at the captain.
To keep tabs on you to make sure nothing bad happened to you.
She asked again.
Why?
Dale shuffled his feet, paused, and answered.
I'm in love with you.
He dropped his eyes.
She started.
In love with me?
Yes, I'm in love with you. I'm sorry if that offends you, but it's the truth. Admiral.
She touched Dale's face.
Commander, my name is Susan. And it doesn't offend me. Thank you.
He touched her hand.
Would you dine with me this evening, Susan?
She regarded David.
Yes, Commander. I would love to. What's your name?
David patted Dale's shoulder and left the room as Dale replied. "Dale." She stood and put her arms around Dale's neck.
Dale. My hero.
And she kissed him. He kissed her back and smiled.
Let's go to my cabin.
She just nodded.
Yes.
Admiral Stone was 6 feet tall but still fit under Dale's chin. She looked up at his face.
I have always wanted a tall boyfriend.
Dale asked.
Am I your boyfriend?
She replied.
I hope so. Dale, I need a shower and a clean uniform. May I use your bathroom?
Dale nodded.
Yes.
Then he ordered.
Computer, a fresh uniform for the Admiral.
Holding his hand, she stepped into the bathroom, gently pulling him in with her. Standing in the shower, Dale looked into her beautiful green eyes.
Susan, will you marry me?
She replied.
I wish, but the regulations.
Dale said forcefully.
Damn the regulations. His entire ship is an exception to the regulations. Will you marry me?
She replied.
Oh, Dale, I want to say yes. What?
He kissed her and said.
Then say yes.
She responded.
Let me think, please.
The ship arrived in Sector 00 and entered a parking orbit. Admiral York teleported aboard and awarded Dale Sims a promotion to commander, thanking him for his work to rescue the 2 officers and the ambassador. David transmitted the records from the two uniquarters to Naval Intelligence, limited as it was, in an effort to learn the who and what of the kidnappings. Admiral York ordered the Constitution to stand down for 10 days while Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne recovered. The crew relaxed, repaired items that had been put off because of more pressing issues, and re-engaged with significant others. Admiral Stone and Stella spent time talking and sharing secrets. Susan told Stella.
Stella, Commander Sims, Dale says he loves me.
Stella asked.
How do you feel about him?
She replied.
I don't know. It feels good to know he loves me, but I'm scared. I've never been told anyone loves me before.
And she began to cry. Stella put her arms around Susan.
How did he sound when he told you?
She replied.
Well, he was quiet, nervous, and he stuttered. Oh, and he was sweating.
Finally, Stella said.
He has feelings for you. I know that he volunteered to be teleported to your prison ship, even though O'Reilly told him it would be very dangerous.
Susan said.
He asked me to marry him.
Stella paused.
Marry?
Susan answered.
Yes. But I told him I needed time to think. I'm supposed to have dinner with him in his cabin this evening. Should I go?
Stella said quietly.
Yes. You should spend time with him and get to really know him.
Susan almost whispered.
But the regulations.
Stella replied.
Damn the regulations. He wants you, and you want him. I probably should have said, he needs you, and you need him. Besides, this ship has some 180 or so couples that defy the regulations, and we are the most successful ship in the fleet.
Admiral Susan Stone arrived at Commander Dale Sims' cabin, nervous, shaking a little, but resolute as she thumbed the annunciator. Dale opened the door and greeted her with a kiss.
Come in. Hungry?
She nodded, too nervous to speak. He led her to a table elegantly set with silver fixtures and goblets of a red wine. He pulled out the chair and helped her to slide in. He smiled.
Hope you like what I've prepared. Just beef stroganoff with wild rice and pea pods.
She gave him a little smile and nodded.
Yes.
They dined, chatting about nothing much. Then after the meal, he led her to a love seat.
I would like to enjoy a movie with you. Do you have any favorites?
She replied.
Well, I don't know. Whatever you would like.
He said.
Well, my favorite movie features a character that has kept the attention of Americans for many years. Computer shows Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve.
She said.
Oh, I've never seen that movie.
During the show, he sat with his arm around her, being the consummate gentleman. After the movie, she said that she needed to sleep. He escorted her to her cabin, and she entered. He asked.
Dinner and a movie tomorrow evening?
And she nodded.
Yes.
She kissed him and closed her door. Susan stopped inside her cabin and leaned on the wall. She thought.
He's a perfect gentleman. He's nice. He's courageous. He's tall. He's strong. He's handsome. He's just perfect.
She slid down the wall and sat on the floor. She called Stella.
Stella, could you come to my cabin? I need a friend.
Stella found Susan sitting on the floor, sobbing. Stella sat beside her, put her arm around her, and asked.
Susan, what is it?
Susan blubbered.
Oh, Stella, I'm in love. And I don't know what to do. Help me, please.
Stella asked.
What happened?
She replied.
It was a perfect evening. A simply delicious meal, and we sat together and watched a movie. He never did anything to take advantage. Then he walked me here, we kissed, and he left.
Stella asked.
What did you want to happen?
Susan cried a little harder.
I don't know.
Stella said.
Oh yes you do. I suggest that you go back to him and tell him you love him and, yes, you will marry him. Ask that your engagement be a year, so you two can really get to know each other well.
Susan stopped crying.
Go over there now?
Stella answered.
Yes. Now. Susan leaped up and ran out of her cabin.